before you've uttered a single syllable, before your credentials have been examined, before anyone has bothered to discover the depth of your intellect or the nobility of your intentions, a verdict has already been rendered against you. Within the first 3 seconds of visual contact, the human brain, that ancient predatory machine, has categorized you, assessed your threat level, calculated your social value, and determined whether you deserve attention or dismissal. This isn't conscious prejudice or deliberate malice. This is evolutionary programming hardwired into our neurological architecture over millennia of survival. When your external presentation broadcasts signals of scarcity, diminishment, or defeat, you activate an invisible rejection mechanism in every person you encounter. They don't consciously decide to underestimate you. Their primitive brain does it automatically, relegating you to the category of the insignificant before rational thought even engages. The Renaissance political philosopher Niccolò Machiavelli documented this merciless reality 5 centuries ago, when he observed that common people are perpetually deceived by surface impressions, and since the masses constitute the majority, their superficial judgments shape the entire architecture of opportunity. You've experienced this psychological violence firsthand, walking into spaces where the ambient energy shifted the moment you appeared, where gazes swept across your presence as though you were transparent, where individuals with half your competence and a fraction of your integrity received invitations to tables you couldn't even approach. This isn't misfortune or coincidence. This is the mathematical precision of perceptual dynamics. And until you decode and manipulate these dynamics, every system will function as an obstacle designed specifically to exclude you. If you enjoy stories like this, consider subscribing. Most people who watch aren't subscribed yet. The prevailing misconception is that poverty represents merely an absence of financial resources, but this fundamentally misunderstands how human perception operates at the biological level. Poverty, in the grammar of social animals, functions as an olfactory signature, a pheromone of vulnerability that broadcasts your position in the dominance hierarchy before verbal communication commences. When your aesthetic presentation communicates reduction rather than abundance, you're not simply appearing unsuccessful, you're triggering ancient predatory instincts embedded in the human survival mechanism. This perceptual signal transforms you into a target rather than a peer, inviting exploitation, dismissal, and the systematic withholding of resources that flow naturally toward those who project strength. The sophisticated mind recognizes that financial limitation and the appearance of destitution are entirely separate phenomena. Yet most individuals conflate them, accepting their circumstances as an excuse for neglecting the strategic manipulation of their external presentation. What the masses fail to comprehend is that there exists a psychological technology for bypassing the traditional pathways to respect, a method for compelling the social environment to grant you deference and consideration even when your material circumstances remain constrained. Machiavelli identified this technology as the strategic construction of princely appearance, the deliberate weaponization of visual communication to bend reality toward your projected image rather than your actual condition. However, before you can successfully deploy this strategy, you must first diagnose the fundamental error you're currently perpetuating, the subtle but devastating transmission you broadcast with every public appearance. A signal that essentially announces to the world that you represent negligible value and can be safely disregarded or exploited. Once you terminate this counterproductive broadcast, the nature of your conflicts transforms entirely, resistance diminishes, and pathways that seemed permanently barricaded begin to open. But this transformation requires understanding why contemporary society punishes the aesthetic of scarcity with such disproportionate brutality. And the answer reveals uncomfortable truths about human nature that most people desperately want to deny. The architecture of human civilization doesn't operate according to principles of fairness or justice. It operates according to principles of efficiency and energy conservation. The human cognitive system represents the most sophisticated efficiency machine evolution has produced, constantly seeking shortcuts to minimize the metabolic cost of decision-making. Extended analysis requires significant neural resources, so the brain has developed rapid assessment protocols that deliver instant verdicts based on minimal information, and visual appearance serves as the primary data stream for these snap judgments. When you present yourself with disheveled grooming, collapsed posture, or an apologetic demeanor, you're essentially providing the observer's brain with a pre-packaged conclusion that saves them the effort of deeper investigation. You're communicating that you've already surrendered to circumstances, already accepted defeat, and therefore they should mirror that assessment and withdraw whatever consideration they might have otherwise offered. This dynamic transcends simple prejudice because people don't necessarily harbor conscious animosity toward those displaying markers of poverty. Rather, they experience an instinctive aversion rooted in association and contagion psychology. The visual markers of scarcity trigger subconscious associations with failure, powerlessness, and misfortune, creating a psychological distancing reflex that humans have inherited from ancestral survival strategies. When someone appears to be struggling, their presence becomes a reminder of vulnerability and the precariousness of social standing, triggering superstitious avoidance behavior as though destitution were transmissible through proximity. Machiavelli articulated this principle when he noted that humans predominantly evaluate others through visual assessment rather than through intimate knowledge, because everyone has access to your appearance, while very few will invest the time to discover your authentic character. Consider your own automatic reactions when encountering someone wearing stained clothing, exhibiting defeated body language, and avoiding eye contact. Did you pause to contemplate their potential genius, their possible philosophical insights, or their hidden talents? The honest answer is no, because your brain executed an instant categorization to conserve processing power, labeling them as someone to avoid, someone who represents risk rather than opportunity. This same merciless efficiency is applied to your own presentation continuously, which means that any moment you appear diminished, you're triggering identical rejection responses in everyone who observes you. The contemporary mythology encourages us to embrace comforting falsehoods that protect our egos from harsh realities. We tell ourselves that authenticity matters more than presentation, that we shouldn't concern ourselves with others' perceptions, that dressing for comfort represents legitimate self-expression rather than strategic negligence. But this narrative represents the psychological refuge of those who have already accepted defeat, because genuine comfort becomes the adversary of power, and authenticity divorced from authority generates nothing but ignored noise. When you neglect the strategic curation of your external presentation, you're not making a statement about your values. You're unilaterally disarming yourself before entering a competitive environment where others arrive fully armored. The battlefield of social mobility and opportunity acquisition doesn't reward the vulnerable or the careless. It systematically eliminates them through countless micro-rejections and opportunity denials that compound over time. The psychological phenomenon, known as the horn effect, operates as the shadow twin of the more commonly discussed halo effect. When observers detect a single negative trait in your presentation, their cognitive system automatically assumes clustering of negative traits across all dimensions. Scuffed shoes or collapsed posture doesn't just communicate poor fashion sense, it triggers assumptions about laziness, intellectual limitation, and ethical unreliability, because discipline manifests visibly. If you demonstrate inability to govern the basic elements of your personal presentation, observers logically conclude that you lack the capacity to manage complex responsibilities like business operations or contractual obligations. Your external appearance functions as evidence of internal character. Or more precisely, that's how the social evaluation system interprets it, regardless of the actual complexity of your circumstances. To neglect this strategic dimension of self-presentation constitutes an act of self-sabotage. You're constructing a false narrative about your capabilities and value that contradicts your actual potential. And the world, operating with brutal literalism, accepts your visual testimony as truth. But here's what most people never discover about the mechanics of resource allocation and opportunity distribution. The paradoxical mechanics of wealth circulation reveals that capital gravitates toward individuals who project the appearance of not requiring it, while systematically avoiding those who desperately need it. Consider the institutional dynamics of lending. When you approach a financial institution radiating desperation, when your grooming communicates urgency, when your vocal patterns reveal anxiety about your circumstances, the entire system contracts against you. Interest rates escalate, approval criteria becomes impossibly stringent, and you're reclassified as unacceptable risk. Now observe the alternative scenario where someone with identical financial need enters the same institution wearing impeccably tailored clothing, displaying grooming that suggests professional success, speaking with the measured cadence of someone evaluating multiple options rather than pleading for a single opportunity. This individual doesn't request assistance. They propose a mutually beneficial arrangement, and suddenly institutional resistance evaporates, terms become favorable, and doors that remained locked for the desperate swing open for the composed. The psychological principle underlying this disparity is associative thinking. The human mind creates automatic correlations between external markers of prosperity and internal qualities like competence, reliability, and future success potential. When your presentation signals need, you're unconsciously categorized as a cost center, someone who will drain resources. When your presentation signals abundance, you're categorized as an investment opportunity, someone who will generate returns. The strategic philosophy of projecting success before achieving it isn't vanity or deception. It's sophisticated understanding of human decision-making architecture and the deployment of that understanding for survival advantage. This represents pure Machiavellian pragmatism, recognizing that appearing diminished triggers cost avoidance reflexes, while appearing formidable triggers investment-seeking reflexes, and nobody volunteers to absorb costs while everyone scrambles to secure profitable investments. When you enter negotiations displaying markers of scarcity, you're implicitly requesting charity, and charity in professional contexts arrives as contemptuous scraps delivered with resentment. When you enter negotiations displaying markers of capability, you're proposing alliance, and alliances are built on perceived mutual benefit and respect. The deeper psychological reality that most people never confront is that decision-makers experience profound anxiety about association with failure because such association threatens their own social standing and professional reputation. If someone extends an opportunity to an individual who presents poorly and that individual underperforms, the decision-maker faces judgment for their poor evaluation skills. Observers will say they should have recognized the warning signs that were visually obvious. However, if someone extends an opportunity to an individual who presents impeccably and that person fails, the decision-maker receives sympathy and absolution. Observers will say the individual successfully deceived everyone through sophisticated presentation. Your external appearance functions as reputational insurance for those considering investing in you. By mastering the visual communication of competence, you reduce the perceived risk that others assume when choosing to engage with you. If you refuse to participate in this perceptual game, you're not demonstrating authenticity or integrity. You're displaying arrogance and entitlement, essentially demanding that the world invest considerable time excavating your hidden value, while you make no effort to make that value visible. The world owes you absolutely nothing. It's your responsibility to extract your own value from obscurity and present it in a format so compelling that even the most superficial observer recognizes it immediately. Machiavelli counseled that effective leaders must become masters of simulation and dissimulation, concealing disadvantageous authentic traits while projecting traits that serve strategic objectives. If you're experiencing hunger, your external presentation must communicate satiation. If you're feeling anxious, your demeanor must project boredom and confidence. If you're navigating poverty, your appearance must suggest you're merely traveling incognito through lower economic strata by choice rather than necessity. Because the instant observers detect the scent of your desperation, predatory behavior intensifies. Now let me reveal something even darker about the biological programming that governs these dynamics. If you found this perspective valuable, hit that like button so this reaches others who need to understand these principles. Dominance hierarchies don't represent social constructs or cultural artifacts. They emerge from biological imperatives that govern behavior across species, from crustaceans to primates to humans. Wolves, chimpanzees, and corporate executives all engage in continuous status assessment, scanning their environment for signals that reveal where each individual ranks in the power structure. When a predator observes prey displaying injury or weakness, it doesn't experience compassion or the impulse to provide assistance. The weakness triggers attack instincts because vulnerable targets represent efficient caloric acquisition with minimal risk. Human civilization has developed sophisticated masks that obscure these primal dynamics. We don't literally tear throats with our teeth anymore, but we execute the same dominance behaviors through legal exploitation, social exclusion, public humiliation, and economic predation, like unconscionably low offers for goods and services. When your presentation broadcasts poverty markers, you're essentially limping in front of predators, signaling that you lack protective allies, lack resources for self-defense, and lack the social capital to generate consequences for those who harm you. This vulnerability explanation illuminates why economically disadvantaged populations experience disproportionate policing, inflated pricing, and inadequate service. They represent low-risk targets for exploitation because retaliation capacity appears minimal. A merchant contemplating fraudulent practices against someone wearing bespoke tailoring experiences, fear of consequences, assuming that individual maintains relationships with legal professionals, possesses influential connections, and wields the social power to destroy reputations through strategic communication. That same merchant, contemplating fraud against someone in threadbare clothing, experiences no such fear, because who will advocate for someone society has already dismissed, and who possesses the platform to make their complaints heard? By presenting yourself with markers of scarcity, you eliminate your deterrence capacity, essentially advertising that exploiting you carries no meaningful risk. I've witnessed individuals possessing extraordinary intellectual capabilities systematically destroyed because they failed to comprehend this dynamic. They believed their work quality would shield them. They believed their loyalty would protect them, but they dressed like subordinates and therefore received treatment appropriate for subordinates. And when organizational restructuring required scapegoats, the accusations fell upon those who appeared incapable of mounting effective defense. Your external presentation functions as psychological armor, generating a force field of hesitation that makes potential predators reconsider their approach. That hesitation represents your weapon in the brief moment where an observer pauses to evaluate whether you might be dangerous, whether you might be important, whether attacking you might generate unacceptable consequences. You seize control of the interaction's frame. But if your appearance generates no hesitation whatsoever, if observers instantly categorize you as victim based on visual assessment, the attack becomes inevitable because you've already lost the psychological contest before conscious interaction begins. You might protest that this system is unjust, that we should inhabit a reality where character receives primary evaluation regardless of superficial presentation. You're welcome to protest gravity while falling off a cliff. Your objections won't alter your trajectory. Machiavelli didn't document idealized versions of human society as it should be. He documented brutal realities of human society as it actually functions. And in that reality, individuals who neglect their protective armor don't survive. Who installed the belief in your consciousness that appearance doesn't matter, that vanity represents moral failure, that humble clothing signals virtue? Typically, this conditioning comes from two sources: individuals invested in maintaining your subordinate position who benefit from your lack of competitive presentation, or individuals who have already surrendered their own ambitions and want to rationalize that surrender by celebrating their neglect as authenticity. The platitude that what's inside counts was invented to comfort the invisible. It's a sedative that prevents people from recognizing that while internal character determines retention and long-term relationships, external appearance determines access and initial opportunities. Your interior self is the product you're offering. Your exterior self is the marketing campaign. You could possess the cure for terminal illness, a revolutionary philosophical framework, or a billion-dollar algorithm, but if you package it in garbage, bury it in your backyard, and post warning signs around it, no potential customer will ever discover its value. Marketing isn't deception. Marketing is respect for the product's potential and recognition that value without visibility is functionally equivalent to worthlessness. If you genuinely value the quality of your mind and the nobility of your character, why would you choose to house those assets in a physical temple that resembles a condemned structure? To dress carelessly, to groom negligently, to carry yourself with the physical vocabulary of defeat constitutes an act of profound self-disrespect, and the social environment functions as a mirror that reflects whatever respect you demonstrate toward yourself. If you treat yourself like a clearance item desperate for any buyer, the world will negotiate you down to nothing. If you treat yourself like a rare artifact of immense value, the world will hesitate before touching you with unworthy hands. There exists a spiritual dimension to this dynamic that transcends mere strategy. When you sharpen your external presentation, you simultaneously sharpen your internal consciousness. The discipline required to perfect your exterior appearance bleeds into your interior psychological landscape, transforming your thought patterns and decision-making processes. Put on formal clothing, or even just a meticulously maintained casual outfit. Correct your posture, refine your grooming, and observe how your cognitive processes shift. You become more deliberate in speech, your words carry more gravity, you stop unconsciously apologizing for occupying space. The mask you wear gradually becomes your face. This is the transformative alchemy that separates outliers from the masses. Most people wait to feel confident before improving their presentation. But powerful individuals understand that you improve your presentation to construct confidence. The impoverished mindset waits for internal feelings to change before taking external action. The powerful mindset takes external action to generate internal feelings. You must fundamentally reconceptualize your relationship with personal presentation. Stop viewing it as a chore or vanity and recognize it as a weapon, a tool of influence, a technology for manipulating probability in your favor. Every morning, you're selecting a costume for the role you'll play in the ongoing theater of your life. Are you casting yourself as the background extra, the victim who exists to make protagonists look better, the comic relief? Or are you casting yourself as the lead character, the architect of outcomes, the figure who commands attention and respect? The wardrobe department operates under your complete control, yet so many people select the costume of defeat and then express confusion when their life script reads like a tragedy. The communication of scarcity extends far beyond clothing into the realm of non-verbal behavior, particularly what I call the poverty gaze, a pattern of visual interaction characterized by constant apology. It manifests as the habitual breaking of eye contact first, the reflexive shrinking of your physical presence when entering spaces, the nervous laughter that erupts when someone delivers an insult or dismissive comment. These represent the behavioral patterns of serfs and subordinates. You can dress someone accustomed to begging in the finest silk available, but if they maintain the poverty gaze, they'll still communicate low status. Conversely, you can dress a true king in rags, but if he maintains the royal gaze, that steady, unblinking evaluation of his environment that communicates complete comfort with his own authority, he'll be recognized as a king traveling incognito. Machiavelli observed that lions don't need to roar to generate fear. Their mere presence suffices because their body language communicates apex predator status. When you display poverty markers in your nonverbal behavior, you typically become hyperactive in compensation, over-explaining your presence, smiling excessively to purchase approval, attempting to please everyone to avoid rejection. This is the behavioral signature of scarcity consciousness. You're broadcasting that you require their approval for survival, that you lack the resources to exist without their validation. Abundance consciousness operates inversely. It's characterized by calm, by stillness, by comfort with silence. When you can exist in silence without anxiety, you communicate wealth. When you can occupy space without apologizing, you communicate power. Everything functions against the individual who displays poverty markers because their body language screams a message of wrongness, of not belonging, of requesting forgiveness for existing, and the social environment responds to that request by confirming their worst fears and demanding they leave. Breaking this pattern requires training your physical behavior before your psychology catches up. You must move at the pace of someone whose compensation doesn't depend on hourly productivity. You must hold eye contact with others until they feel the weight of your evaluation rather than you feeling judged by them. You must execute the internal surf that continues to breathe within your consciousness, because as long as that subordinate identity survives, no amount of financial resources will save you from its sabotage. Observe lottery winners who return to poverty within 3 years despite receiving millions. Their financial situation changed, but they never killed the internal surf. They purchased expensive items, but wore them with the guilty body language of a thief. They looked poor while sitting in luxury vehicles, and the world stripped those resources away because their presentation never matched their circumstances. This brings us to perhaps the loudest signal of poverty that most people never recognize: excessive noise. The individual displaying poverty consciousness is noisy with words, noisy with movements, noisy with complaints and explanations. They feel compelled to fill every silence because silence generates anxiety. In silence, they fear they're being negatively evaluated, so they babble compulsively, revealing their plans, exposing their insecurities, discussing their debt, their failed relationships, their physical ailments, essentially handing observers all the ammunition required to destroy them, while calling this damaging behavior being authentic or being open. Zernert. Power operates in silence. Study apex predators, and you'll notice they don't announce their presence until the moment of strike. The tiger doesn't roar a warning, it attacks from silence. The most powerful executive in a conference room typically speaks the least, observing, evaluating, only contributing when their words will carry maximum impact. When you talk excessively, you're inflating supply while crashing demand, signaling that your words carry minimal value because you're willing to distribute them freely without discretion. To never display poverty markers, you must master the strategic use of the closed mouth. When you remain silent, you become a blank canvas onto which others project their own fantasies and anxieties. They begin wondering what you're thinking, whether you possess information they lack, whether you're judging them and finding them wanting. In that vacuum of information, they construct power on your behalf. They assume you're the evaluator rather than the evaluated, and in their insecurity, they begin performing to impress you. This represents the Machiavellian reversal. Through strategic silence, you force others into the subordinate position of seeking your approval rather than you seeking theirs. But the instant you start complaining about mundane struggles like expensive gas or how exhausted you feel, the spell shatters. You become mortal, common, one of the struggling masses, and you don't want to be one of the masses. You want to be recognized as the exception, the outlier who operates according to different rules. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. This principle of scarcity and silence extends into digital presence and social media behavior. The individual who posts everything, documenting every meal, every passing emotional state, every random thought that crosses their consciousness, appears spiritually impoverished, regardless of their actual financial situation. They look desperate for validation, dancing frantically for likes and comments, performing constantly for an audience that barely pays attention. Conversely, the individual who posts rarely but with clear intention, who curates their digital presence with the same care a museum curator selects pieces for exhibition, appears to possess a life too rich and fulfilling to be adequately captured on a screen. Scarcity creates value in attention economics. Make your presence rare. Make your words function like diamonds, rare, hard, and capable of cutting. You might protest that you cannot afford expensive clothing or luxury items that signal wealth, but this objection reveals a failure of imagination because looking poor rarely correlates with the brand labels you wear. It correlates with the maintenance of your presentation and the discipline you demonstrate. A man wearing an inexpensive shirt that's been pressed until crisp, perfectly white, and tucked with precision looks wealthier than a man wearing a $1,000 designer hoodie that's stained and wrinkled. Discipline costs nothing in monetary terms. It costs effort and consistency. Polishing your shoes requires time, not money. Ironing your clothing requires effort, not financial resources. maintaining clean fingernails, sharp grooming, and a lean physique. These represent investments of willpower rather than capital. When you appear unkempt, you're signaling chaos and inability to control even the basic entropy of your personal environment. And if you cannot control your own entropy, observers logically conclude you cannot manage complex systems like businesses or lead teams effectively. The wealthy possess a specific kind of cleanliness that signals their removal from the grinding friction of daily survival struggle. The poor look dusty. They look worn down by constant contact with the harsh surfaces of scarcity. You must scrub this dust from your personal presentation because it's visible in microscopic details that accumulate into an overall impression. The heels of your shoes, the collar of your jacket, the screen of your phone, is it shattered? A cracked phone screen functions as a screaming siren broadcasting poverty because it communicates that you broke something valuable and lack the resources to repair it, forcing you to live surrounded by broken things. Never live with broken things in your environment because it damages your psychological architecture. It teaches your subconscious that you deserve brokenness, that dysfunction is your natural state. Either fix damaged items immediately or hide them from public view, but never parade brokenness as part of your identity. Machiavelli taught that the prince must appear compassionate, faithful, humane, upright, and religious. And the critical word in that instruction is appear, because the focus is on strategic perception management rather than authentic internal states. You must curate the artifacts of your life with the same attention a film director curates what appears in the frame. If you drive a deteriorating vehicle covered in rust, park it several blocks away and walk the final distance, arriving on foot, standing tall, controlling the narrative. This isn't deception, this is framing. Identical to how a photographer frames a shot to exclude the garbage can at the edge of the scene. You're the director of your own image. Your job is to crop out elements that contradict the narrative you're building. If you're inviting a potential ally or business partner to a meal, don't select a venue you cannot comfortably afford and then visibly stress over the bill. That anxiety releases the scent of poverty more powerfully than words ever could. Instead, suggest meeting at a coffee shop. Purchase 2 simple black coffees, but drink them with the unhurried leisure of royalty, focusing entirely on the quality of conversation. Pay the small bill with a genuine smile. It's far better to demonstrate mastery over a small domain than to appear as a servant struggling in a large one. There's a final element to the appearance of poverty that's the most difficult truth to accept. The company you keep functions as part of your presentation. If you're consistently surrounded by individuals who display defeated body language, who speak in the vocabulary of victimhood, who dress in the uniform of failure, you're painted with the same brush in observers' minds, regardless of your personal qualities. You become the average of the 5 people you're most frequently seen with. If you walk into a room accompanied by a pack of hyenas, no observer will mistake you for a lion no matter how you personally present. This reality is cruel. I acknowledge that. You have friendships you value, you have loyalty to your history and the people who supported you during difficult times. But if you're serious about ascending to higher levels of success and influence, you must understand that optics matter. When you're photographed with successful people, the halo effect transfers to you. You borrow their credibility and status through association. This is why social climbers fight desperately to appear in photographs with influential figures. They understand that the image itself becomes a valuable asset. You don't necessarily have to abandon relationships with old friends, but you must compartmentalize strategically. When you're operating in the battlefield of professional success, you must be seen walking with other warriors. If you bring a jester to the war council, you won't be taken seriously regardless of your personal capabilities. Machiavelli warned that a prince is evaluated by the quality of the ministers and advisors he keeps in his inner circle. If they're capable and loyal, he's considered wise. If they're incompetent, he's considered a fool by association. Audit your social circle with brutal honesty. Who elevates your image and makes you appear like a leader? Who drags down your perceived status and makes you appear like a participant in dysfunction? Distance yourself from the visual drag because the world operates on the assumption that birds of a feather flock together. If your flock appears poor and defeated, you appear poor and defeated. This requires hardness of heart and willingness to prioritize effectiveness over comfort. But remember the objective here. The objective isn't to be nice or to make everyone happy. The objective is to be effective and to create the life you claim you want. To never look poor requires curating your entire ecosystem, your clothing, your words, your physical presence, your companions. It's total warfare on negative perception. Now here's the paradox that makes this entire strategy so powerful. When you execute this comprehensively, when you meticulously eliminate every signal of poverty from your presentation, something remarkable happens beyond mere perception management. You actually stop being poor. This isn't mysticism or magical thinking. It's straightforward mechanics. When you dress with power and authority, people treat you with respect and consideration. When you're treated with respect, you're granted access to opportunities that remain invisible to those perceived as low status. When you're granted opportunities, you acquire resources and capabilities. The mask you wear eventually summons the face beneath it. You begin to internalize your own performance. You look in the mirror and no longer see a victim or someone struggling. You see a contender, someone who belongs in competitive spaces. And because you see a contender, you begin acting like one. You take calculated risks. You negotiate more aggressively. You walk away from exploitative deals. You've essentially hacked your own neurochemistry and serotonin regulation. This is the ultimate secret that transforms this from mere performance into genuine transformation. The strategically constructed exterior rebuilds the authentic interior. By refusing to look poor, you're rejecting the identity of poverty at the deepest level. You're rejecting the script that says you're destined to struggle perpetually. You're declaring physically and visually that you're destined for significantly more. And the world, which is desperately seeking leadership, desperately seeking strength, desperately seeking anything that appears like certainty in uncertain times, the world bows in response. Doors that remained locked swing open. Smiles that were withheld suddenly appear. Opportunities that seemed impossible materialize. Machiavelli was correct when he stated that everyone sees what you appear to be, while very few actually experience who you really are. So give them a vision of greatness. Dazzle them with the image of who you're becoming rather than who you've been. Don't wait for gold to arrive before you polish the crown. Wear the crown now, the gold will follow the king. But if you remain in rags waiting for permission to transform, you'll die in them still waiting. The choice belongs entirely to you, but understand that judgment is arriving constantly, every day, every second, from every pair of eyes that lands on your presentation. Will they see a victim, or will they see a master? You now understand the law, but understanding represents only the first step. Execution is where most people fall into the abyss. There are specific psychological techniques for manipulating perception that are too dangerous to share on this open platform. There are triggers within human psychology that can make giants kneel and make paupers appear like princes. If this content opened your eyes, understand that what you've seen here is only what I can show publicly. There are videos I cannot upload for general audiences. There are aspects of dark psychology and influence that I simply cannot discuss openly on YouTube without facing censorship or demonetization. The algorithm actively suppresses the most powerful information. If you want access to what's hidden, click the join button below and step into the architect level membership. You'll unlock exclusive, uncensored content that dives into the deepest parts of the human psyche and social manipulation. Most won't take this step, and that's precisely the point. Separation is where power lives.